go, and slid after his dead wife and his children across the icy, snow-covered deck and over the side.
As thousands battle desperately for survival, some of the commanders have already made their arrangements. 13-year-old Günther Meidel makes an interesting discovery.
We got to this cutter. It was pretty full. And among others, there was Captain Peterson, who was supposed to be responsible for the ship as commanding officer. He was an older man. He was already there.
Apparently not the last to leave the sinking ship.
We had the impression, and certainly they said later, that he had got into the boat quite early on because he said, "This is the only chance I have of saving myself."
There are still thousands of people on board the Gustloff, struggling upwards as the ship sinks beneath them.
We climbed onto the rigging. Me first, my mother handed me my sister. I sat her down beside me. I simply sat her down at my feet. If it had been my child, I would probably have put her between my feet. And then I gave my mother my hand. And my mother was gone. Nothing but water. I looked for, I wanted to give my sister my hand or hold her tight. My sister was gone.
Dorrit is just 6 years old. She and her mother drown in the freezing waters of the Baltic. Now, training matters less than instinct. A furious protectiveness may be enough to save a whole family.
A big wave came. Mother shoved us onto a raft, an 8-man raft I can still remember. And she pushed Manfred onto a small 4-man raft. And she held on to that. And then the wave dragged us away from the ship.
In spite of the heavy seas, all 3 brothers are on the same life raft.
That was something. 3 of us together. But where's Mother? Where's Hannelore, our sister? Where's Grandad?
They will all survive, except Jürgen's grandfather, who'd shepherded the family from the ruins of Königsberg. After 62 minutes, the Wilhelm Gustloff slides to the depths, lights blazing. The air temperature is minus 20 degrees. The water is just above freezing. Most people will die within minutes.
I was swimming behind a life raft. People were hanging on like bunches of grapes, holding on to one another. They tried to hold on to me. I kicked them away. I tell you quite honestly, I kicked them away because they would have dragged me under.
She manages to climb up onto a raft.
There were children floating around us, wearing life jackets. And just imagine, their heads are much, much heavier than their feet. And their heads were in the water, and their little legs were poking up in the air. Afterwards, I could never sing songs to my own child about little ducklings. It still upsets me today.
Das bedrückt mich heute noch.
Now there's nothing to do but wait.
I kept thinking, why is no one rescuing us? Why is no one here? And everyone started shouting in a chorus, help! You can't describe that cry. It came from deep down inside. And no one came.
Just a few nautical miles away is the pride of the German Navy, the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper with a torpedo boat escort. By 18 minutes past 10, they're there. But the Hipper already has 2,000 people on board. They're afraid of another torpedo attack.
And then they sailed away again. They've forgotten us. Of course, there was a feeling of despair that you'd never forget for the rest of your life. You're floating in a little nutshell, and they just sail away.
But the torpedo boat has stayed behind. It picks up survivors.
And then hundreds of people surrounded the ship who needed rescuing. And there were hundreds of dead. You couldn't tell one from the other. And of course it was a terrible situation, because what had happened to the Gustloff could just as easily happen to us. But I said, rescue comes first, you have to take the risk. And then suddenly there was a miracle on the bridge. The captain of the Gustloff appeared. That was quite an encounter, quite a surprise. He was dry. And the commander of the U-boat cadets appeared. Dry.
All 5 of the captains survive, while thousands of their passengers die. The torpedo boat saves as many passengers as it can. But they are themselves not out of danger. S-13 torpedoes the rescuers too.
I was standing on the starboard bridge wing, and I saw them, quite well spaced. And then there was only one thing to do. Full ahead and hard a starboard.
They launched depth charges against the unseen enemy. S-13 makes good its escape. 564 survivors are dragged from the sea.
Then my first officer came to me and said, Herr Kaloy is what we call a lieutenant commander on the ship. We can't pick up anymore. It's over. I said, all right, then we'll stop. And with a heavy heart, we left the site of the sinking.
But now other rescue craft are on their way.
And suddenly there was a ship. A big ship not too far away. Oh dear God, where did that come from? No one saw it coming. And then they threw the rope across and tied it on. And then all I could do is hold up my hands, and they dragged me up, and I fainted.
A sailor stood in the doorway, looking at me intently. I look back at him, and he says, "There's a girl over there who won't stop wailing about her sister, and she looks a lot like you." And then off he goes and fetches Rosemary, and I jump up. We hug each other and laugh and cry.
Few others had anything to celebrate that day. By first light, the last rescue ships reach the scene. They find total silence.
We got to the site of the sinking. As far as the eye could see, it was covered with clothes, coats, shoes, heaven knows what else, floating around.
The lifeboats are still crowded.
And in one of those boats, there were dead bodies. Bodies of women and bodies of children. And my future father went on board, and in the stern he found a woolen bundle, a woolen blanket, stiff with ice. And when he took a closer look, it turned out to be me.
The child is about a year old. It has been in the boat for 7 hours.
Oh, I said, it's a baby. He shifted the blanket a bit and I could see the blue romper suit. And that used to be a sign it was a boy.
There's no way of knowing who the baby is. But Petty Officer Werner Fick isn't about to abandon him.
And he said, listen, can't I have him? And I said, Werner, that would be a good thing. You haven't got any children. You're old enough. I know your wife. That's a good idea.
A family gets a new child, a boy gets a new home, and a new name, Peter. After the war, many children will be searching for their parents.
Wir suchen unsere Muttis und Vatis, bitte helft sie uns wiederfinden.
And many parents search desperately for their lost children.
Of course, I noticed that couples were continually coming to see my parents, to see if I was their son. And of course, all these visits were a strain for my parents.
Many families are reunited. Not Peter Weiser's, but maybe that doesn't matter. He had much to be thankful for.
It was a family home that was full of love, and the man who found me took me in and brought me up. He's my father, and my real father.
Ships brought the survivors to the western ports that had been their goal. (1,239 passengers survived out of more than 10,000. Over 9,000 drowned in the icy waters, half of them children and babies. And yet no one claims the torpedoing of the Wilhelm Gustloff was a war crime.
The Gustloff was sailing in combat waters with its lights switched off. It was carrying anti-aircraft guns. It wasn't sailing under the Red Cross. It had 1,000 trained U-boat personnel on board. The sinking of the Gustloff was an entirely legal act of war. It wasn't a war crime.
The sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff didn't bring any glory on the crew of the S-13.
For years, our naval staff doubted that Alexander Marinescu had sunk the Gustloff. They believed the Air Force had bombed it. That's why there were no medals. Especially since Marinescu was a very awkward figure for the senior staff. So they made sure he was kept quiet.
Years after his death, Marinescu is finally declared a hero of the Soviet Union. Even this doesn't upset the Gustloff survivors.
Marinescu wasn't responsible for sinking the Gustloff, and the torpedoes were only the catalyst. The whole thing started on the 30th of January 1933, not the 30th of January 1945.
Before the war is over, hundreds of thousands more will die. Combatants, prisoners, and civilians, many of them anonymously. The Gustloff survivors remember.
A survivor once said, "The dead are all right. They have it behind them. We die every year." I've thought about that a lot, and he's right.